Welcome to this episode of Thoughts of a Whole Brain Man. And today, just to have a, a book as the topic, The Sense of Being Stared At by Rupert Sheldrake. The Sense of Being Stared At. Fantastic book and a rather fantastic man. Rupert Sheldrake is a biologist who has spent all of his adult life researching telepathy and ESP scientifically. I was fortunate enough once, I think must have been around 2009, that I participated in psychic experiments in Rupert Sheldrake's house. And it was very good fun, very illuminating. He conducted a lecture for us when I was doing the MA in Cultural Astronomy and Astrology at Bar University, when The Sense of Being Stared At had just been published. And it's based on an interesting idea, right? And that is that we, our ancestors, developed the ability to sense when they were being watched. So when our ancestors came down from the canopy and they wandered out into the forest, there would be predators in foliage. And so it's believed that our ancestors developed this kind of almost like an ESP sense of being able to know when eyes were staring at you. And this idea seems to be quite ubiquitous in cultures, the belief that there is the evil eye. Some cultures hang turquoise in the home to ward off the evil eye, the Eye of Horus in Egypt. Even in I think it was a 1985 pop song, Madonna, in a song called Crazy for You, sang the line, "I can feel the weight of your stare." And it's not such a hard thing to think. There's a common folklore, isn't there, that a lady always knows when her husband is cheating. And that kind of sounds a little bit like women have this ability to kind of watch and, like remote viewing, as if they can have like a television screen inside their head, and there's a kind of a camera that follows you about and they know everything you're doing and everything you're going. I don't think it's quite like that, right? Because I think that with this sense of being stared at, we do have a kind of like an awareness that someone, as it were, places the eye of their attention upon us. And if someone removes the eye of attention from us, we feel it. We feel something's different. We feel, a cold wind with tumbleweed blowing through. We feel a sense of the warmth of someone's attention is now gone. And I think that's what people notice. And then there's just the assumption that the only reason for that is because they've placed their attention somewhere else, i.e. upon somewhere else. I've got a friend who quite often phones when she's taken her dog for a walk. And her dog is well behaved, mostly, until she phones me. And every time she phones me, the dog runs off. And she has to, I'm sorry, I've just got to get the dog. She hangs up the call. She goes and gets the dog, and the dog returns to being well behaved until she phones me again. I've known people say that happens with their children. They're at home and the children are behaving well and it's great. And as soon as they start talking to a friend, the kids kind of play up, as it were. And in their playing up, they retrieve mum's attention once again. The sense of being stared at. And Sheldrake, like I mentioned, has looked at these things with a sense of academia. For example, one time he did this brilliant experiment once. They got a person who was a dog owner, and they put cameras all around the house of the dog owner. And the dog owner was instructed to meet Sheldrake at a pub fairly nearby where they lived. And they were then going to get into Sheldrake's car and go for a random drive. So random that Sheldrake hadn't even figured out where they were going to go. So there's absolutely no way that any of the timing of anything could be communicated to the dog. right? And so they kind of went on this rambling kind of countryside drive sort of thing. And then once they felt we'd been gone enough, instead of the owner being dropped their car so that the dog would hear the familiar engine, right? No, no, no. Sheldrake drove the owner back to the house. And so the dog would have absolutely no sense, no clue, no hint at all that their owner was coming home. And they did this quite a few times, and every single time, about 20 minutes before the owner arrived home, the dogs would start going mad. They'd be spinning around and running up and down and, tails everywhere. And yet, how did they know? There used to be a singing group in Britain in the 1980s and 70s as well, I think, maybe even the 90s too, called the Nolan Sisters. And they all knew each other very well, so there was a rapport between them all. And Sheldrake arranged it that all of the sisters would be in a hotel room in a town. And one of the sisters was elected to be on her own in a hotel across a few streets away, on her own, with the hotel phone that obviously didn't have call recognition. And she had to, just sit by the phone and wait. And randomly, different sisters would phone her. And before she picked up the phone, she would then declare who she believed it was. And she got an extraordinarily high number of accurate guesses, intuitions. So Sheldrake spent a long time doing these sorts of things. Other things like having a sensitive standing on one side of a closed door and an amputee putting their stump against the door, and the sensitive kind of feeling to see whether or not it was an arm stump or a leg one and where it was coming through. And they could feel it. So you might have heard of curling photography, where people take photographs of an aura. But apparently, if you take a curling photograph of a leaf and you get the kind of the auric shape around the leaf, if you then damage the leaf and take another curling photograph, the curling photograph is still the same. And so Sheldrake proposed a theory called the zoomorphic field. The zoomorphic field theory, in that every species has its own zoomorphic field, which is its kind of its state of being, as it were. And the biological imperative is to fulfill that state of being in our development and the expression of life. Fascinating ideas, but the skeptical world, the scientific world, do not like Mr. Sheldrake looking at these things. So one day, part of the Skeptic Society threw down the gauntlet and challenged Sheldrake to a debate. I think it was going to be held at the Commonwealth Institute in London. Scientists, science magazine writers were invited, editors, all sorts of people, doctors, professors, judges, all these great eminent people were invited to this debate. And Sheldrake turned up with his laptop and his slides and his stats ready to roll. The other person was going to go first. The skeptic person was going to go first. And the skeptic person went up to the podium and merely said, "Well, gentlemen, we already know this is going to be nonsense, isn't it? How can you have a debate between the possibility of ESP and, Sheldrake's work? I'm sure he's got some graphs and things to show us, but it's all nonsense. So there's nothing more I can add." And then Sheldrake stood up and spent 45 minutes showing them charts, graphs, stats, facts, figures. And out of the two people, he was the scientist. The other person was just a biased skeptic, forming conclusions without any investigation, a very unscientific person. So they all had to go and vote for Sheldrake. He was the only scientist in the room, as it were. So the sense of being stared at by Sheldrake, he's written a number of works, and they're all fascinating and highly worth looking into. So yes, when someone has affection for you and you feel the weight of their stare upon you, it can be a very warming, comforting thing. If someone places the eye of their attention upon you and it's not welcome, it can be a very uncomfortable thing. So be mindful about where you place the eye of your attention. It's always better to rest one's attention upon, welcome shoulders, because there's nothing nicer than one's attention being welcome. And there's nothing more uncomfortable than one's attention being unwelcome. And it's not the other person that's the problem. It's the person choosing where they place their attention. Yes. So sometimes we know when someone's got their eye upon us. And sometimes it's worth being sensitive to it, both its presence and its absence. Take care. Thank you for lending me your attention during the process of this little talk, and I'll see you very soon with another episode of Thoughts of a Whole Brain Man. Thank you. Take care. Bye.